Hi, and welcome to BNEWS InDepth. I'm your host, Sydney Boles. It was 2021 when a change in the state's testing criteria meant that Burlington's water was no longer considered safe from the harmful chemicals known as PFAS. The findings instigated a time of turmoil in town, both for the residents concerned about the findings and for the officials tasked with fixing it. At the same time, residents have been experiencing annual water conservation efforts out of concern for water levels at the town's reservoir, Mill Pond. To address both these issues, town and state leadership leapt into action, appropriating funds and drafting plans. They decided to install a PFAS filtration system at the Mill Pond Reservoir and to connect the town to the MWRA, which provides water to dozens of towns in this part of the state. It was a massive undertaking, and it's mostly done. The finishing touches are happening now. But questions still remain. Have we done it? What does it mean that we're now a part of the MWRA? And how should we be thinking about water conservation in this new era of getting water from a new source? We're going to dig into all of it. Burlington Public Works Director Brian White will take us inside the department that's making all this happen. Then we'll meet two people from the MWRA itself to learn how the agency works. Lastly, Burlington Master Gardener Peter Capola teaches us how to conserve water in our own backyards. But first, State Representative Ken Gordon stopped by to give us the perspective from state government. I started by asking him how he found out that Burlington was having water issues.
I work closely with the municipality, and Burlington is it's a well-run town, and Paul Sagarino does such a great job, among other things, just communicating with me. So I knew that a situation had developed where, because of the PFAS issue, a lot of it was because of testing, because testing has advanced, and so it showed that we had an issue that we had to address at Vinebrook and otherwise. So anyway, in conversations with Paul, we need to help. The town meeting voted to connect to the MWRA, Mass Water Resources Authority, for its water. But there was a cost. There was an upfront cost to that, so that's a discussion. Are we going to invest in this? And we were able to get funding from the state through MassWorks grants, through advocacy from, that was able to contribute to help offset that.
So a couple of things are going on here. One that we talked about is there were advances in testing for PFAS chemicals. So we saw that water that a couple of years ago was thought to be fine or was fine under the regulations. Those regulations changed, testing ability changes, and now all of a sudden Burlington's water is not passing those standards anymore. Right. So something has to happen there. And then there's also water restrictions are happening elsewhere. There's maybe some concerns about whether we have enough water to satisfy demands during the summer. So a couple of things are going on. We start to connect to the MWRA, we start to connect to those PFAS filters. Are we done now? Once those two projects are done, have we solved the problems, or are there ongoing concerns here?
Well, it's real hard to predict the future as to what you just mentioned. Testing standards changed, so that changed the future outlook of how we were dealing with the PFAS issue. And we also, as you said, went through a major drought over the last few years. It's been raining
Not so much this year,
It's raining out now. But we can remember what it was like during these major droughts. And so there was a need for water that could more easily be met through the MWRA. So has this been solved? Really, the significant issues that we were facing is being solved, which is to say we're getting MWRA water. We've been getting 1.5 million gallons a day for some time now. We've now hooked up to the pipes that will get us 3.5 million, which will get our day-to-day needs satisfied, except maybe the most serious meaning when the demand is the highest, which is in the summer when people are watering outdoor lawns. But the 3.5 will be sufficient. And what happens is that the state comes in and does its inspection, and it has to inspect from time to time while it's running. It can go back. It's okay, now it's been a little while. There's another inspection. So we're in that phase now.
So there will be some ongoing work as any time just to make sure that we're still in compliance and all that stuff.
Yeah, plus we'll have 6.5 million in a couple of years when I think they call that phase 2A is finished, and that will meet all our needs with a surplus of water, if water in reserve. And then we've got the mill pond that we're looking at essentially filtering that water. There's a new filtration plant coming on there so that we have redundant water. So if people are worried that, well, what happens if the MWRA has an issue? Maybe 10, 15 years ago, people might remember there was an issue with the pipes coming in. Burlington was okay because it did not rely on the MWRA then. But now Burlington will have this redundant supply. So if anything does happen with the MWRA, it can turn back to Mill Pond, which will be operating.
Actually, I mean, to me, just as someone who's learning about this, observing this, the redundancy is pretty comforting, I think, that this is something that our officials are thinking about. It's something that the MWRA thinks of and is happy with. So that's a good thing, I think, for folks who are sort of concerned about what this might mean. But I do want to ask, you also represent Bedford, I believe, which has been a part of the MWRA's water for quite some time.
Right.
And you're sort of looking at things from a state perspective. Do you have any wisdom for Burlington as we sort of change our relationship to where we get our water? Ways to interact with the MWRA, different things we might want to think about. Has Bedford learned anything that Burlington could take advantage of?
Well, I'll tell you what I've learned is that this is, and many people on the state level look at this Burlington water hookup with the MWRA as being one of the most significant municipal projects that's been undertaken by a town or city with respect to a state resource in years.
I mean, it was pretty quick.
It was quick, it was efficient, it was fiscally efficient. Our town's leaders, our DPW leaders, were able to time hookups so that when construction of pipes was coming in from Arlington through into Lexington, we were able to tie in when construction was going on, when the roads were already ripped up in those towns. It saved us millions of dollars to scope that at the right time. We knew what was happening, and we knew what was going to happen because of our engineering experts. It was done so efficiently. It saved the residents of Burlington so much money by doing things the right way. So going back to what the town did was first they worked with the state. We got a total of $4.5 million toward this project, which again is significant because otherwise it's the residents of Burlington paying the whole thing. We then the town then reached out to the businesses because they're going to benefit from greater access to water. And so the businesses contributed millions of dollars. Nordblum contributed $4 million. Also, BCAT, you got the word out. BCAT got the word out, so residents were able to be comforted by information, and that's very important. So if you look through BNEWS, Rich Hosford, who was here at that time, did story after story, keeping people updated so that they knew that even though there was a water ban and it was very inconvenient, or even though some residents were getting bottled water and that was really something they didn't want to have to do, but there was a solution coming. It takes time to hook a pipe up. That's significant construction work, but that work was done. And so I really think that Burlington can teach a lot of lessons to other municipalities about how to undergo a project like this efficiently with respect to finance, fiscally efficiency and with time.
Ken Gordon, I think those are the issues I wanted to talk with you about today. Thank you so much for coming in.
Sydney, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for looking into this important issue.
The person tasked with making all of this happen is Brian White, Burlington's Director of Public Works. I started out by asking him how Burlington actually consumes water.
Our wintertime demands are about 2.5 million gallons per day. In the summer, depending on what kind of water restrictions or conservation measures are in place, it can peak to 5.5 million gallons per day.
And is most of that literally just people watering their lawns?
There's a portion of that, but there's a lot of things that there is some water use. So during non-drought years, we find that it kind of levels off more around 3.5 million gallons per day. Right now we're about that right now. I think yesterday from the computer it showed a 3.5 roughly MGD demand. Just prior to our attempt to start up the filters, we were getting into the 4.5. So there's definitely a lot that goes into outdoor watering, but there is summer flows that just come with the territory. More construction happens. Construction typically uses more water for various things: outdoor work, pressure washing, car washing, that sort of thing. You know, people will fill pools, run sprinklers for kids, and so there's water use that's associated with the summer that isn't strictly for watering, but that probably can't be avoided. But you know.
But some of it can be, which is why we sometimes get these seasonal restrictions on, you know, water on the same even or odd day as your house number, or only water after 5 p.m. That kind of thing is intended to curb some of that summer usage. Is that right?
Yeah. A lot of the restrictions started up when we lost our train B of the Vinebrook treatment plant back in the I think around 2013 or so, 2015. Okay. That had there was another chemical that similar to PFAS where EPA, DEP came out with guidelines for not exceeding certain limits for 1,4-dioxane, and that one of the 3 trains of the groundwater wells that Vinebrook uses contained higher levels than that guideline. So back then we took that offline, which we lost. By taking that offline, we lost 1 million gallons per day of capacity. Wow. So that's kind of where everything started. Prior to that, the Vinebrook could produce roughly 3 million gallons per day. Mill Pond could produce 3 to 3.5 million gallons per day. So at 6 to 6.5 million gallons per day, even the real high peaks in the summer of 5.5, we could still handle. But when we lost the 1, now we're kind of getting into not being able to meet the summer demand, and that's when you know, with Vinebrook being more reduced capacity, historically we've always tried to keep the reservoir at specific levels for redundancy and reserve throughout the summer. So we had to lean more, put more pressure on Mill Pond to make up for that difference, and so then we started running into low levels at the reservoir, which led to more aggressive restrictions and that sort of thing. So you know, I think with the plan with the filters and Mill Pond should still be able to produce 3.5 million gallons per day with the filters. The MWRA connection's another 3.5, so that will offset what Vinebrook used to be able to produce.
So back to sort of our water usage. Are we able to say anything, or are you able to say anything about how much of our usage goes to residential use versus commercial use, industrial use?
Yeah, for a number of years, for several years, it's been roughly 50-50, plus or minus 5% or so. So pre-COVID, it was a little more skewed commercial. So it might have been 45-55 residential to commercial. But since COVID, obviously that would have flipped, and so we're still on the consumption side skewed a little bit more residential. Residential's probably 53 to or 55 to 45.
One of the things that interests me about Burlington as a community is that we are so commercial heavy, but that wasn't always the case. It was only 50, 60 years ago that we were a really agricultural, pretty rural community. So I wonder, is our water system, the pipes that we have, the width of the pipes, is it the kind of system that has been able to scale with us as we've grown to a much more densely populated, much more commercial community? Or I don't know, can our water system keep up? Is there a limit to how much the system that we have can handle?
There's obviously limits to every system. As far as Burlington goes, our trends have actually been slightly declining over the years.
In terms of usage?
Demand,
interesting.
So it might look like development is increasing and the demand has been going up, but I think a lot of the plumbing code that requires certain efficiencies and automatic on-off or sinks, that sort of thing. Those type of water conserving measures, I think, offset the development. So I don't think it's significant. I wouldn't say it's a significant decline. It's maybe more flat than decline, but it is in a slight decline.
Right, and especially given that we've seen such a growth in an industry, I think it is remarkable that we've kept that trend steady. That's really interesting. I'm like kind of flabbergasted. That's neat. So let's talk about this MWRA hookup. Why did Burlington start looking into connecting to the MWRA?
I mean, it's probably been looked at for a while, just whenever issues came up at treatment plants and trying to produce your own water and the difficulty. It's probably been, I'm sure, looked at over the course of a number of different administrations and DPW directors. But it really came to light when we worked with the consultant when we were having the issues at Vinebrook. Back in 2015, we did a comprehensive study to analyze the town's, the demand and the projected demand. So all these capital projects that we've done, even though we're in a slight decline, we do design and try to we estimate that the demand will go up. So we do have factor of safety built into that for the work that we're doing. But that was a big part of that study when looking at the options of how to handle Burlington's supply and demand issue was connecting to the MWRA. So it was one option would be to rehabilitate Vinebrook and do new wells or provide 1,4-dioxane treatment and to keep that online in order to keep the demand, or is it too expensive, or is there too much reliability to rely on just water that Burlington produces with its two plants? And a big part of the study and the recommendation was it made sense to have a little more redundancy, different sources. So Mill Pond, we have our own source that we can rely on if there's an issue with MWRA, vice versa. If there's an issue with Mill Pond, we can use MWRA and their resources.
What changes for you at the DPW in terms of workload or processes now that we're joining the MWRA? Do they maintain the pipes? Do we maintain the pipes? What's different now?
No, we still own all our pipes, our stand pipes. Obviously, we'll still own and have to maintain Mill Pond. So, largely, our role is not going to change too much. Even from a treatment plant personnel standpoint, it's like many fields. It's been very hard to get applicants that have the licenses needed to run plants. Especially Mill Pond is one of the higher rated. You need a higher license than many to operate it. So as it was when we had Vinebrook and Mill Pond, we were already running into labor issues with staffing those two. So it actually works out that we have basically what we believe is the perfect amount of staff to operate Mill Pond currently, even though we still technically have Vinebrook operational or available. It hasn't run for a number of months, but we could run it if we had to in an emergency. So from a treatment plant standpoint, nothing's really going to change. They'll just have one plant to focus on versus balancing, having to run back across town to two different plants. MWRA connection does give us some contingency, so if we do have staffing problems, we can obviously, if we just had Vine Brook and Mill Pond, we're still dealing with the same staff. With MWRA now, if there's a staffing issue, we can increase flow from that pipe versus producing it at Mill Pond if we had to. Our pipe, our water and sewer division and the staff that handles just the pipes, hydrants, that sort of thing, nothing's going to change for them.
Cool. I have one last question for you. The answer might just be, no, that's not happening right now. That's fine. But I think, at least when I think about municipal water use, I think about it in the context of climate change. Droughts, floods, storms, changes in usage, changes in demand. Is that an impact? How big of an impact is it? Is it going to be a bigger impact in 15 years, or do you have to think about it now? How do you think about all of this pipes and plants and staffing and redundancy in the context of this huge society-changing problem? Unless you don't, and then it's a no, and that's fine.
No, so I think a portion of that went into having the desire to have redundancy from just our own plants in our own region. MWRA comes from the Quabbin, so if like last year, if you looked at the state website, that the Drought Management Task Force, I believe they're called. If you look at their website that shows you the different regions of Massachusetts that are under drought conditions and what level drought they are, they're not all the same. And so at one point we might be in a drought condition, but where MWRA's water resources, they might be getting rain frequently.
Or vice versa.
So that we feel as a town, or at least I'll say from a DPW standpoint and engineering, that redundancy has a big importance to have that flexibility.
And all of that is going on behind the scenes when you or I turn on our tap and get that nice flow of brisk, clean, clear drinking water. Brian White, thank you so much for joining me.
Sure, you're welcome.
Our next conversation is with representatives of the MWRA itself to introduce us to our new partner in municipal water. Stephen Smargiassi is the MWRA's Director of Planning and Sustainability, and Katie Ronan has been working with Burlington throughout our connection to the system. Let's dig in. So I guess I just want to start with a little brief introduction of the work that each of you do. Katie, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So my name's Katie Ronan. I'm a project manager of environmental permitting at MWRA. So I do a few things at MWRA. I work on environmental permitting of our construction projects. I also work on what we call system expansion, which is new communities typically seeking to join our water system. So that's why I've been working with Burlington on that over the past few years.
Awesome. And Stephen?
Steve, I'm Director of Planning and Sustainability, so if it's not nailed down firmly elsewhere in the organization, it rolls into my corner. But basically, long-term thinking, whether it's system expansion, capital needs in the system, or how we think about greenhouse gases, sustainability, climate change adaptation. So it's sort of that longer look at our issues.
This is great. We've got the immediate local angle with you, Katie, and like that big scale, everything conversation with you. Fantastic. I guess also, before we dive in deeper, maybe could you give us a little bit of like the elevator pitch on what the MWRA is? What's all the arms of this octopus?
Sure. So we're the Mass Water Resources Authority. We're essentially the wholesale water and sewer provider to most of metropolitan Boston. So we provide wholesale sewer service. Communities like Burlington collect local sewage, bring it together in their pipes, and then move it into our pipes. And then we move that down to our treatment plant in Winthrop, Deer Island, and provide environmentally appropriate treatment, discharge out in the Mass, 9.5 miles out in the Mass Bay. So if you flush your toilet, eventually it gets to us and we treat it and dispose of it properly. On the drinking water side, essentially the same story. We've got the Quabbin and Wachusett reservoirs out in central Massachusetts. We move the water from there to our treatment plant in Marlborough and then into the Boston area where we provide it to 53 cities and towns that then move their local pipes and sell it to individuals. So we're the beginning and the end, and the towns are in the middle with their smaller pipes and their local customers.
And this has been an organization that's been growing since the 80s, offering services to more and more communities.
We were recreated in 1985 as the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority. We actually go back 150, 170 years
Wow.
from now to the 1850s as a regional water and sewer provider, a regional water provider, and then a regional sewer provider. So,
Katie, what are the reasons that a town might consider joining the MWRA?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons. I mean, one of the big ones is water quality. If towns have, water quality concerns, whether it's PFAS is the kind of new emerging contaminant of concerns, prior to that, there's several, that might drive a community to say, okay, we need to think about other options. And if MWRA is an option, are we close enough? Could we make an infrastructure connection? Are all reasons. Also water quantity, increasingly with climate change, and just weather extremes associated with that, drought. A lot of these smaller local systems that may be on the outskirts, not members of our current water community or our current water communities, might be experiencing issues meeting demand in their local systems.
I mean, it seems like both of those were issues here in Burlington,
Yeah.
both PFAS contamination issues and a concern that in a drought year, we might be conserving more than is really comfortable. We might want another source of water.
That's exactly right.
exactly.
How does it work contractually? Who pays who here?
Yeah, so our kind of relationship with our water member communities is governed by what we call a water supply agreement, and basically, so we assess the community annually based on their water use. The community Burlington will still be billing its residents just like it always has in the past, and then we kind of assess based on the 1 million gallons per day or 1 million gallons per year that are used on an annual basis.
It's just like a town providing water and sewer service to the locals. They've got their total dollar amount and they have to apportion it among all the users. We do the same thing. We know how much it costs to run the system and we apportion it based on each community's share of that revenue.
So essentially, Burlington will now be paying you for the share of water that
Exactly.
That's right, but nothing will really change for the residents in Burlington. They'll still be, paying their water bills to the community.
Okay. I imagine that some of the same considerations that Burlington has been dealing with in terms of contamination, in terms of usage, drought, variability in water of access service has been impacting you all. So how do you, in your reservoirs, think about both safety of the water and quantity of water over time?
Great question. So we're blessed in a way because the folks who designed our system 100 years ago really thought about how to get high quality water. So rather than collecting the water where we all live, our water comes from the Quabbin and Wachusett reservoirs out in central Mass. We own a large fraction of the land around those reservoirs that we call that the watershed, where the water falls from the sky, it runs off the land, comes into the reservoir. We protect that, prevent it from being improperly developed, so the high quality source water. If you start with high quality water, you're more likely going to have it come out of the tap. If you start with lower quality water, you need to spend a lot more money on treatment in order to have high quality water come out of the tap. And maybe it may not make sense to do enough treatment if the source isn't poor enough quality. So we're blessed with high quality source water and then high quality treatment to move it in. So that's the sort of quality side of things. And if you look at our annual water quality report, if folks are interested, they can look at our website, get that information. For many of the things that were a concern here in Burlington, the per- polyfluorinated or PFAS substances, we essentially don't have them. The levels are so small you can't even quantify them. They're there because they're everywhere, but they're so small that you can't even figure out how much is there. Whereas in Burlington, those numbers were high enough that they exceeded the current state standards and the federal standards. The other side of the question is, it's great to have high quality water, but do you have enough? So two things to say about that. One, we were able to reduce water use since the 1980s to where we are now, to the point where we have capacity to help communities like Burlington. And the other question, one that we've looked at, is that long-term question. The climate's changing, more wet periods, more dry periods, more precipitation in total. How does that affect our system? Well, we've looked closely at that, and we found that in fact we will expect in the future to have as much or more reliable supply because our big reservoirs will be able to capture the wet periods and hold them over for the dry periods. So we're in good shape, I think.
That's fantastic news for a town like Burlington that's specifically thinking about redundancy. As some of our water supplies might have supply issues, you all are looking at having potentially more than you do now.
And we plan for the fact that our member communities, like Burlington, that may use some local water and our supply, in our planning, we assume that we're going to need to help them out. In fact, we go further than that. We assume that in real droughts, that communities outside our region may need to tap into us temporarily. And we build that into our planning in order to ensure that reliability.
Thanks.
Exactly.
I mean, so that's I think a pretty big picture understanding, but I think these actually past 2 years are an interesting microcosm, because last year we were in a drought, and this year's kind of a wetter than average year. So is there a potential that any given year could be a problem either direction, even if long term it looks good, or is there really enough guarantee in any given situation?
Our reservoirs hold something on the order of 4 or 5 years of supply. That provides a big flywheel. So a wet year or a dry year, wet years the reservoir fills up some more. Dry years it goes down a little bit, but during the last drought we were well within our normal operating range through the entire drought.
That's awesome.
And that was a pretty steep short drought, but some communities around the region were in trouble. I wouldn't say we coasted through it, because we do encourage people to use water wisely, efficiently, even if we've got supply. I mean, the key thing in all of this is we're all in it together. Make sure that if you use water efficiently at home, then there's enough for everybody in those dry periods.
Actually, Katie, I want to ask you about that, because there is sort of a residential water usage, but there's also commercial usage. And both of those in Burlington as well as around the region are getting more dense. We are becoming more dense as a region. How does the MWRA think about providing water in regions where demand might be going up because of increasing density, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good question.
We do think about that. In our master plans, we look at the population and employment growth that's expected over the next 40 or so years and do incorporate that into our thinking. What we don't want to do is to make bad assumptions now about what the future holds so that we then are in trouble later. So we won't add communities to the system if we think that we don't have enough capacity to go out 40 plus years. The interesting thing is, well, part of our job as an agency, part of my job as director of planning is to think the water system's 170 years old. We think in not 5 years, 10 years, we think 40, 60, 80 years or more out, because when we make a commitment, we need to be able to live up to it long term.
That's amazing. I mean, I think the story of Burlington is a story of really rapid growth from a residential community, or I'm sorry, a rural agricultural community to a residential community and then a business community in a really short amount of time. I talked to our DPW director, Brian White, about whether our system has been able to handle that rapid growth. And he said, yeah, essentially, there's always a limit on how much you can grow, but we've done a good job, it sounds like, in preparing for that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you guys think about that as well.
Yeah, that's a really important piece. You need to make sure you're available for the long term. The good news, though, generally, is that a new development comes in, it's more efficient per person or per employee than the older development. New water, if you go to Home Depot and want to buy a new washing machine, it uses less water than the one you have at home. If you buy a new toilet, it uses less water probably than the one you're replacing. As new development comes in, it's more efficient than the old development. So in fact, when we look at base demand, we still continue to see it improving in efficiency over time.
That's cool,
that gives a little room for capacity.
Right,
Yeah.
even as population grows, usage is going down because of
Yeah, that's why we've seen sort of in our, over the years, our customers in the greater Boston area, despite their development, people, moving to Boston, everything, but despite that, the reducing demand.
Yeah, I think just personally, I think that is contrary to what my assumptions would have been, and that is
Yeah.
cool, you know, to have your assumptions.
So you really have to
Exactly.
look at the numbers on this stuff. That's the interesting thing. You have your impression. So you drive through Boston right now, and your impression is, oh my goodness, it's bursting at the seams. Boston uses less water today than it did prior to 1900. So we use less water now than we did 120 some years
How
ago
could that
in
be?
the city of Boston.
How could that be?
Because first of all, in 1890, we weren't charging by the gallon. We weren't metering the water. It was inexpensive, and people used it inefficiently. If you had a toilet in 1920, it probably used 7 gallons per day.
Wow.
If you turned on the faucet, it was probably flowing at 6 or 8 gallons per minute. That's not the case now. We've changed the code for toilets. All of the appliances we use, every faucet uses less water, your shower uses less water. So people are more efficient than they used to be.
Also, just the economic shift, you know, where it's no more water intense sort of industrial manufacturing. You know, we've kind of had a shift in the commercial use of water.
Right.
We here in Burlington have a history of summertime water conservation mandates. People have been asked not to water their lawns in the summer. You know, different years the specifics vary. I think this summer it's you can water between or before 9 a.m. and after 5 p.m. on even or odd days depending on your house number, I think is the rule this summer. My understanding is we've been asked by the MWRA as we've signed on to get water from you all to continue doing some water conservation efforts in the name of conservation, even as we're getting access to your supply. Can you explain the rationale there, what you're looking for Burlington to do and why?
Yeah, so it's kind of the common sense, you know, best practices of water conservation. You know, the town will likely be doing some outreach on, you know, residential and outdoor or indoor and outdoor residential water conservation, just, you know, outreach. And we have a lot of materials that we'll be sharing with the town, you know, just to help folks conserve water because, as Steve mentioned, it's sort of the common good and, you know, it helps everyone. You know, the town, I think, will be working on reducing what we call unaccounted for water, any like leakage in the system, you know, just increasing efficiencies. And then there will still likely be restrictions during drought conditions. You know, when we're in a drought condition as declared by the Secretary of the Environment, you know, there will likely be restrictions, again, just to, you know, do our part in the best practices.
Yeah, and some of those are things that we've suggested,
Yes.
and some of those are things that were required by the regulatory agencies. We're the supplier, both in Burlington and the MWRA are both regulated by the State Water Resource Commission on this and going through the MEPA process, so everybody's comments. So some of those were imposed on Burlington, not from MWRA, but we would say good practice in any case. We do encourage people to use water efficiently. You don't need to water your grass every day. You certainly don't need to water your driveway. It's not going to grow, no matter how much you water it. So, you know, trying to think about, you know, it is a precious resource. It's coming all the way from Quabbin, 65 miles to Boston, even further to get all the way up here to Burlington. We put a lot of care into making it drinking water of really high quality, so use it efficiently. Don't waste it.
I think I appreciate, that the preciousness of water, and I can hear the voices in my head of maybe some community members who care so much about their lawns, whether it's because their kids play there, or it's where they have their barbecues, or that sort of classic American lawn. What do you say to someone who just feels like this is so important to me? I want this.
You can have it. In fact, watering less frequently and deeper, you know, a couple times a week, a little deeper, and not watering when it's when it's just rained, actually makes the lawn healthier. And if you don't water it and fertilize it too much, you get to mow it a little less. So you can have a perfectly fine lawn for your kids to play on, you know, the pride of your neighborhood, without wasting water.
Sure.
I think folks can folks figure that out once they get there. We're not suggesting, no one's suggesting that you have to have a bare patch of dirt. You might want something more interesting on your front lawn than just grass.
Some wildflowers, maybe?
Some people do
Clover?
that. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. And
Yeah.
if you follow what's going on elsewhere in the country, like in California or elsewhere, folks are thinking about, where do I want grass and where do I want something that uses less water than grass?
Sure. Katie, Stephen, I think those are my questions for you. Is there anything else you guys would like to say to Burlington as kind of an introduction? Hello, we're working together now. Anything folks should know?
Yeah, we're happy to be partnering with Burlington. You know, as we were discussing, it's been sort of a long road that the community has gone down between the regulatory environmental permitting associated with the connecting and, you know, the infrastructure connecting. There was a bunch of pipeline that was needed to be built. So, you know, they finally did it. I went to our board a week or two ago, so it's approved, and we're excited to be partnering with them and have them in the community. And, you know, being a member of MWRA does come with a lot of benefits in terms of support. We offer a lot of support to our member communities if there were ever, God forbid, a, you know, water supply emergency or something like that. You know, we're always there to help out. So we are a resource, and, you know, we're happy to partner with them.
Yeah. Glad to have them join. Burlington's been on the sewer system for a long time. Have them be a partner on the water system as well is great.
Okay. Stephen Estes Maggiassi, Katie Ronan, thank you very much for being here.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Our last part of the water conservation is going to bring the whole thing home, literally. If you've been following along and feel inspired to conserve water in your own backyard, Master Gardener Peter Coppola has some tips.
As residents, we're so wrapped up in everything that's going on during the day with meals and family and buying things and going to work that we don't really take the time to learn about how to grow healthy plants. So during the summer, we put the plants in the ground and we just figure, give it a little fertilizer, throw some water on it, things will go great. What we don't understand is that plants have an upper limit where it just gets too hot, upper temperature limit, where it gets too hot for it to photosynthesize and grow food for itself. And that temperature limit typically hits early July and goes all the way through August. And at that time, you'll actually see plants wilt during the day, and the normal thing or the first thought you have is, oh, the plant doesn't have enough water, so I'll water it. And that's just the opposite of what's going on. It's just too hot. It's too hot for you to be outside. You want to be in an air-conditioned house. Well, the plants don't want to be out there either.
So in some ways, watering your garden at that time of year is like trying to keep something alive that's just not going to happen.
Exactly. And what you end up doing sometimes is you overwater to the point where you push the oxygen out of the soil and drown the plant. Another thing, people don't understand that roots inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. It's the opposite of what the shoot system, the plant growth above the soil, does. So the roots need oxygen in order to survive. So when you saturate the soil with water, you push all the oxygen out of the soil and you actually drown the plant.
So I'm really excited about this, Peter. You brought a couple of props with you today to help illustrate this. So I think you brought a couple of little blown up molecules over there, is that right?
Yep. So a healthy soil contains a lot of organic matter. The thing I always tell people in my gardening classes is what you're doing is you're feeding the soil. You're feeding the microorganisms in the soil, and by feeding the microorganisms, they're breaking down the soil into the elements that a plant needs for healthy growth and protecting the plant. So when you have a healthy soil, what you have is the inorganic matter, which is the sand, silt, and clay, and these are a blow-up, by the way. This is not a real soil. This is a magnification. Organic matter, which feeds the microbes, bonded together by water. Water molecules are magnetically attracted to each other. So when the soil molecule, or the soil particles are wet, they attract each other and they make these little things called aggregates. And what the aggregates do is they create, when they're assembled, air pockets. Because of all of this organic matter that's in there, they can't get too close together, so you end up with air pockets. So this is what you want your soil to look like. Air pockets, water, and then the food for the microbes.
But you're saying that if you water it too much, you could fill up those air pockets.
And then drown the plants.
Drown the plants. Okay.
Exactly.
So there's another piece that you were talking about with me, which is that by using specific kinds of fertilizer, we can actually offset the balance of things and need to water more than we might otherwise if we were using different fertilizers. So talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so plants absorb water through the process of osmosis. It's kind of like how our lungs work. We inhale oxygen, goes into our lungs, and the pores are so small in the lungs that the only way the oxygen particles pass through the lung wall, but blood doesn't go the other way. Well, plants are the same way. So in the process of osmosis, water moves from a low concentration of salt into a higher concentration of salt. So in a normal soil, healthy soil, the plant is saltier than the soil. But when you put fertilizer down, fertilizer is in the form of salt. So it's not nitrogen, it's nitrate. So you make the soil saltier than the plant, and you actually stop the flow of water. That's why a lot of people talk about burnout or brownout when they put lawn fertilizer down. I burned my lawn. That's because you over-fertilized and you prevented the plant from being able to absorb the water.
Okay. So what I'm gathering is there's this very complicated chemical web of substances passing back and forth happening every time you take out your watering sprinkler system. But we're having this conversation about water conservation. Burlington has a history of needing to conserve because of all the, all of the water usage, drought, reservoir stuff.
Right.
So let's give people some tips for what they can do if they want to have a lawn that maybe uses less water, help the town, help their lawn, all that stuff. Starting with fertilizer. You have a suggestion for a better way to fertilize. Tell me about that.
Okay, so again, it's all about feeding the microbes. And microbes don't eat salt. They don't eat chemicals. They eat organic matter. So the idea is to try to get as much organic matter into the soil for the microbes to eat and break it down into the elements that a plant needs to grow. And I have my own fertilizer that I make, which is coffee-based because we all drink coffee, and there are plenty of coffee shops around Burlington where you can get the coffee. So this is 100% organic, and bone meal, blood meal, coffee grounds, lime to sweeten the soil. It's all in there, and you put it down. It will feed the microbes.
So let's pause here a little bit because I think coffee grounds people can make that happen. Some of this other stuff, bone meal, kelp meal, dolomite, lime.
Lime.
It's a little harder to come by. What are all these things?
No, you get those at the nursery, garden nurseries, or you can go to a box retailer. They're
Okay.
all in the garden
Okay.
section. They're all readily available, and they're all 100% organic.
So this is your recipe has 4 parts coffee grounds, 1 part blood meal, 1 part dolomite lime, 1 part kelp meal, and half a part bone meal. Talk about why those things, what ingredients are in there that the plants need.
Right. So a plant needs 18 elements in order to grow. The primary elements being hydrogen, oxygen, and water. I'm sorry, hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon.
There we go.
And that's 96% of a plant's needs. It's 96%. Well, it gets that 96% from air and water. The other elements it gets from the either your chemical fertilizers that you purchase or that you make.
So this is things like calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, things like that.
All of that stuff. And when you purchase fertilizer, even if you buy the salty kind, the granular fertilizer, it'll say right on the package that it's only about maybe 10% nitrogen, 5% phosphorus, 15% potassium. It's not, so you buy a bag and you're only getting about 25% of those 3 elements that they call macronutrients. You're still getting 85% of stuff, and that stuff happens to be paper, shredded paper, cardboard.
Stuff that the plant doesn't necessarily need.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because it's already in the soil.
So that's great. Love this. One tip: switch to an organic fertilizer. Think about making your own. Another thing people might think about if they want to conserve water in their backyards is native plants.
The best thing to do right now, because we are all trying to be green and we are all focusing on pollinators. We want our butterflies and bees. So the best thing right now to do is forget about the no mow May month.
No mow May as in don't mow your lawn in May.
Don't mow your lawn in May, and instead turn the soil and create a meadow in your backyard. The less grass you have to mow, the less gasoline you're going to use with your lawnmower, the less noise emitting from your lawnmower, the more space you have to grow plants that pollinators want you to have in your yard. So what I would do, if I really wanted to focus on reducing water use, I would, wherever I don't need grass, underneath trees where grass doesn't grow anyway, turn the soil, put down compost, cover it with mulch. And then over time, start planting native plants and herbaceous perennials, which are plants that die back below the soil line during the winter and then come back up.
Can you give some examples of what those might be, those plants?
Herbaceous perennials are your daylilies, your irises, your peony, your hosta, astilbe. There are tons and tons of plants that die back to the ground. The other reason for doing that is because with this climate change that we have going on, it gets so cold during the winter that we end up with a lot of winter kill. And that's what happened this year with that Arctic blast. I don't know if people remember back in March, the weather was getting warm, the buds were beginning to swell out on the plants, and then we had this Arctic blast come down and then ended up killing a lot of our plants that were already above ground. Whereas the herbaceous perennials that were still below grade came up and they're doing great right now.
I'm thinking about someone listening to this and thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but I love having a lawn for my kids to run around in, to barbecue, to, be able to lay out in the sun maybe. Is there a way to balance having that classic American grass backyard with water conservation and pollinator stuff?
Yeah, there really isn't, except that to just not fertilize. If you can live with the grass being green, but not this deep LGPA golf tournament tour green, if you can live with that, then that'll be great. Because if you don't put inorganic fertilizer in the soil, you don't raise the salt level, and you don't require as much water for the lawn. And the other thing is, in the month of July and August, remember what I said earlier, the temperature is so hot, the plants are exhausted, they don't want to grow. So let them rest. The soil, it will go dormant, it'll get a lighter green and maybe die back depending on how much natural rainfall we get, but so what? It's tired. If you don't weaken the lawn, then you're not going to have as much insect damage that you would have normally if you keep watering and forcing it to grow and do what it doesn't want to do. It's just like you get exhausted and your other fences go down and you get ill.
So what I hear you saying is we have to work with what nature already wants to be doing instead of forcing it
Exactly.
to do what we want to do.
Exactly.
Peter, are there any other tips? I'm thinking, I don't know how realistic this is, something like rainwater harvesting or other things that people can think about before we wrap up.
Just think about soil evaporation. So what that means is you can water all day long, but if it's hot, like in July and August, the water in the soil is just going to evaporate and rise out. So all that water you put into the soil doesn't benefit the plants. So the best thing to do is water early in the morning before it gets too hot. So stop watering, say like around 9 o'clock. Allow that water to percolate into the soil a little bit deeper, so you'll have less evaporation. And water after 4 o'clock, sometime between 4 and 6:30 at night, to allow the water to evaporate and the leaves and the plants and the grass to dry off so you don't end up with diseases. But do it during those periods where the water can percolate into the soil rather than be wasted and evaporate into the atmosphere.
That's really interesting actually, because those are the rules that the town has in place anyway to conserve water. So, by doing right by your plants, you're also doing right by town regulations in some ways.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. And then should people be watering every other day, every 3 days?
Every plant, when you buy the package, even including lawns, it says that the plant needs 1 inch of water per week. That's 1 cubic inch of water per acreage or area that a plant needs. So for example, if you have a marigold, small marigold, it maybe grows to about a foot in diameter. So that's 1 square foot, 144 square inches, that's 144 cubic inches. Well, a gallon of water is 231 cubic inches. So a marigold plant only needs a half a gallon of water per week.
Okay.
So if you monitor the weather, the rainfall coming down during the week, we got a half an inch of rain this week, all right, then the marigold only needs a quart of water and not a half gallon of water.
That is so much math. That's a lot of math if you've got a lot of plants.
Just pay attention. And again, if you put a lot of organic matter into the soil, and mix it in with the soil. It will retain more water. When it does rain more than 1 inch per week, it'll percolate down, it'll saturate the soil to over 1 foot in depth, and it'll sit there, so when you do have these periods where we don't get a lot of rainfall, the water's already in the soil for the plant to take up.
Okay, you've given us a lot to think about, a lot of different options to keep the garden a little more natural in these challenging times. Peter, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
If you want to see a wildflower meadow for yourself, check out the community garden near Francis Wyman Elementary School. And that's our show. Thanks so much for joining me as we learned about the latest in Burlington water. I've been your host, Sydney Boles, and I'll see you next time on BNEWS InDepth.